"This ghetto trash pulled a gun on me, Your Honor." Officer Luis Ramirez's voice thundered through the courtroom as he jabbed a finger toward Dr. Nadia Brooks. She screamed slurs and tried to mow me down with her stolen car. Nadia, mid-40s, sat perfectly still at the defense table, government laptop beside her, silently watching him spin each poisonous lie like a practiced performer. The defendant is a longtime offender who thinks her welfare checks make her untouchable. Ramirez pressed on, eyes blazing with fake moral outrage. "She threatened to have me killed and bragged about gang ties." The prosecutor smirked while people in the gallery nodded along. The judge scribbled notes, seemingly swayed by the veteran officer's confident testimony, despite knowing him only on paper. Not a single sentence Ramirez uttered was true. Every word was calculated perjury aimed at wrecking an innocent woman's life. What this crooked cop didn't realize was that the woman he targeted carried a federal badge with more reach than his. Ever watch someone blow up their own career under oath? The courthouse was jam-packed, the air heavy. As Ramirez adjusted his uniform and touched the Bible, his 15 years' worth of service ribbons glittered under the fluorescent lights as he promised to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. "Officer Ramirez," the prosecutor began smoothly, "please describe what happened on the night of March 15th. Ramirez cleared his throat and looked straight at the jury, radiating the assurance of someone who'd rehearsed this tale many times already. "I was running routine traffic enforcement on Oak Ridge Avenue when I saw the defendant's vehicle barreling through a residential zone at a dangerous speed. Standard procedure, Your Honor." He stopped briefly, scanning the room for effect. "When I activated my lights and initiated the stop, the defendant immediately became hostile and non-compliant." His voice hardened. "She refused to show her license and registration when I requested them." From the defense table, Nadia kept her composure, jotting notes on her government-issued tablet with steady, controlled movements. Years of federal work had taught her to document everything, especially lies delivered under oath. "Did the defendant obey your lawful commands?" the prosecutor prompted. "Not at all," Ramirez declared, sounding energized. "She escalated, swearing at me and making threats. She kept reaching toward her glove compartment despite clear instructions." That was the first major fabrication. Nadia's pen glided across her legal pad, cataloging each false claim with the efficiency of someone who'd led federal interviews and depositions. "At what point did you fear for your safety?" the prosecutor asked. Ramirez leaned forward dramatically. "When she lunged toward what I believed was a weapon. I had no choice but to take defensive action. She clearly wanted a violent confrontation." A nervous murmur swept through the public seating. Several jurors shifted in their chairs, their faces tightening as the supposed danger sank in. "Did the defendant say anything that raised further concern?" the prosecutor continued. "Yes, sir." Ramirez nodded solemnly. "She bragged about powerful connections who would, quote, make my life hell. She said people like me wouldn't be working much longer and that friends in high places could end my career." Another complete fabrication. Nadia knew that her access to federal evidence systems would later confirm that none of those statements existed anywhere but in his imagination. Still, Ramirez delivered each lie with award-worthy conviction. "Officer Ramirez," the prosecutor asked, pausing theatrically, "in your 15 years of service, have you seen this level of hostility in a routine traffic stop?" "Never like this," he answered, shaking his head gravely. "The defendant's attitude was unlike anything I've encountered," Ramirez continued. "She acted like her financial status somehow put her above the law." The lies poured out relentlessly, a torrent from a busted Maine. He described a confrontation that lived only in his fantasy, painting Nadia as a violent, entitled criminal who attacked a loyal public servant just doing his job, rather than the professional investigator she truly was. "What happened to your body-worn camera footage from that night?" the prosecutor asked. Ramirez's face shifted into a regretful expression. "Unfortunately, there was a technical malfunction. These devices sometimes fail under high-stress conditions. The camera appeared to work fine at the time, but when we pulled the file later, the data was corrupted, conveniently missing." Nadia noted it, her expression unchanged, even as the evidence was being twisted. Officer Ramirez, how would you describe the defendant's demeanor when backup arrived? The prosecutor asked. She flipped the script, Ramirez replied smoothly. Suddenly she was calm and cooperative, trying to act like the victim. Classic manipulation. She even accused me of being unprofessional when in reality I stayed by the book. His partner, Officer Blake Jensen, sat in the gallery, nodding at every word. Clearly rehearsed support for the invented story. In your professional opinion, was this a lawful traffic stop that escalated solely because of the defendant's actions? Absolutely, Ramirez said without hesitation. I followed procedure at every step. Her aggression and disregard for law enforcement created a dangerous scenario that could have seriously injured me or innocent bystanders. The prosecutor smiled, satisfied. No further questions, Your Honor. Ramirez stepped down, catching Nadia's eye with a smug, victorious smirk. It was the smugness of a man convinced he'd just delivered a flawless performance. His swagger was obvious as he sat back down, relying on his 15-year record and polished image to carry the day. At the defense table, attorney Emily Carter, a young public defender still in her late 20s, looked rattled by his testimony, rifling through her papers and struggling to find a foothold against such apparently credible accusations. But Nadia stayed calm, every breath measured, her federal training evident in her stillness. She had seen corrupt officials crumble before, and Ramirez showed all the classic signs. His narrative was too airtight, too rehearsed, too conveniently tailored for maximum sympathy. Real field encounters were messy and unpredictable. His description sounded like something polished in a conference room. He had no idea the person he lied about documented everything like a federal prosecutor. What Ramirez didn't realize was that his entire performance had just been recorded, mentally and on paper, by someone with the federal authority to pursue perjury. Every false phrase, every intentional distortion, each deliberate fabrication would become part of a much larger investigation into systemic corruption and civil rights abuses. The prosecutor sat down confidently, believing Ramirez's story had nailed the coffin on Nadia's case with little room for doubt. The gallery hummed with whispers about the dangerous defendant and the brave officer who supposedly risked his life to keep the streets safe. Ramirez tugged once more at his uniform, straightening invisible wrinkles, settling in with the ease of a man who thought he'd won. He remained blissfully unaware that he'd just committed multiple felonies in front of a federal agent capable of dismantling not only his career, but his freedom. The moment was ripe for the turn none of them expected, the one that would shift a small-town case into a federal spectacle of police misconduct and weaponized testimony. The defense calls Dr. Nadia Brooks to the stand. The courtroom went silent as Nadia rose. Her movements were deliberate, composed. She left her government briefcase at the table and walked steadily to the witness stand, confidence radiating from every controlled step. The clerk administered the oath with routine speed. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do, Nadia answered, her voice steady and clear. Something in her tone made a few jurors straighten in their seats. There was weight there, authority, that didn't match the prosecution's portrayal of a reckless criminal from the wrong side of town. Emily Carter approached, still visibly nervous but determined. Dr. Brooks, can you explain to the court what truly happened on the evening of March 15th? Nadia's gaze swept the room with the practiced calm of someone accustomed to testifying. Officer Ramirez's account includes multiple material falsehoods given under oath, she began, sending a ripple through the gallery. I will now provide a factual, accurate reconstruction of the events from that night. Objection! The prosecutor snapped. The defendant is offering legal conclusions, not facts. Overruled, Judge Whitman said, leaning forward with interest. The witness may continue. Nadia nodded in acknowledgement. At approximately 8:30 p.m., I was driving south on Oak Ridge Avenue at 25 miles per hour, the posted speed limit. I was returning from a professional meeting concerning federal oversight procedures for local law enforcement agencies. The specificity made Ramirez shift uneasily in his chair. Officer Ramirez initiated a traffic stop without probable cause. Nadia continued, her tone clinical. I immediately pulled over, turned off my engine, and placed both hands on the steering wheel in plain view. This is standard practice for any interaction with police, particularly for black drivers familiar with risk factors. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above the wooden benches. "What happened when he reached your vehicle?" Emily asked. "Initially, the encounter was routine. I handed over my driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance as requested." Nadia paused briefly. His demeanor changed dramatically after he examined my documentation. She drew in a measured breath. Once he saw my home address, which reflects a high-income neighborhood, his attitude shifted. He began making comments about people like me and how we live. Ramirez's jaw clenched. Her recollection was disturbingly precise, and he hadn't expected such clarity. "Can you describe his behavior more specifically?" the defense attorney prompted. "He engaged in what federal civil rights standards classify as pretextual harassment," Nadia replied. "He questioned how I could afford my home and implied I didn't belong there." The prosecutor jumped to his feet again. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is citing federal guidelines. What qualifies her to do that?" Judge Whitman looked intrigued. "Dr. Brooks, please describe your professional background." "I hold a doctorate in criminal justice administration," Nadia answered calmly, "and have extensive experience with federal law enforcement oversight. I've testified as an expert in federal civil rights cases." The whispering in the gallery grew louder. This clearly wasn't the defendant they'd imagined, a seasoned federal expert now sitting in the accused's chair. Emily seized the opening, pushing forward. "What exactly did Officer Ramirez say to you during the stop?" Nadia answered. "He asked how someone like you pays for a house in that area. When I politely declined to answer questions unrelated to the alleged traffic violation, he became increasingly hostile. He said people from your background need to be taught respect for authority." Ramirez's face reddened. He had counted on the usual imbalance, cop versus supposed criminal, nothing like this. "Did you make any of the threatening statements Officer Ramirez described?" Emily asked. "Absolutely not," Nadia said firmly. "I remained seated the entire time, hands visible. I spoke respectfully and did not issue threats of any kind. I never lunged for anything, nor did I attempt to flee. His accusations are objectively false." "How can you be sure of these details?" Emily pressed. Nadia's eyes held a quiet certainty that unsettled the room. "I've been trained to observe and document law enforcement interactions," Nadia replied. "It's second nature." The prosecutor rose for cross-examination, clearly hoping to knock her off balance. "Isn't it convenient that your account contradicts Officer Ramirez at every single point?" he asked. "Truth tends to conflict with lies, counselor," Nadia answered evenly. "That's the nature of perjury." "Objection," the prosecutor barked. "She's accusing a sworn officer of perjury." "Sustained," the judge said, though obviously thinking it. The prosecutor adjusted his tone. "Do you have any proof backing your claims against Officer Ramirez?" Nadia paused, meeting Ramirez's stare across the room. "I documented this incident using methods consistent with federal evidence collection protocols," she said. "When the proper moment arrives, I will present that documentation to the court." A chill slid down Ramirez's spine. Her calm composure didn't match any defendant he'd faced before. She acted like someone quietly holding a trump card. "Dr. Brooks," the prosecutor continued, "you seem remarkably knowledgeable about legal processes for someone in your position." "I've spent years working within the criminal justice system," she replied. "I understand how vital accurate testimony is, and how serious the consequences are for lying under oath." As she spoke, Nadia's eyes flicked briefly to her briefcase at the defense table. Inside, federal credentials and evidence capable of turning this local case into something far larger. "No further questions," the prosecutor concluded, clearly frustrated that he couldn't crack her. As Nadia returned to the defense table, Ramirez watched her carefully, unease deepening. Something about her was fundamentally different from his usual defendants. She didn't sound like someone dodging charges. She sounded like someone who'd questioned witnesses from his side of the badge. He had unknowingly walked into a confrontation with a woman who'd investigated officers like him for years. What he didn't know was that Dr. Nadia Brooks had spent the last 3 years running undercover investigations into police departments across the region. Her traffic stop hadn't been pure bad luck. It was a live-fire federal evidence-gathering opportunity. The real case, far bigger than one traffic ticket, was only now beginning. Somewhere in that courtroom, the balance of power quietly shifted from a local officer to federal oversight. That evening, sunlight slanted into Nadia's home office as she spread thick federal case files across her dark wood desk. Certificates, Department of Justice commendations, and photos from civil rights conferences lined the walls. A professional command center almost no one outside her circle had ever seen. Her daughter, Layla, now 18 and as sharp-eyed as her mother, knocked gently on the door before stepping into the organized chaos. "Mom, you've been in here for hours. You okay?" Layla asked. Nadia looked up from a folder stamped Confidential, DOJ Civil Rights Division, and gave a tired smile. "Just getting ready for court tomorrow, honey." "The one where that cop lied about you." Layla's voice held fierce indignation. She'd inherited her mother's sense of justice. "That and more," Nadia replied, opening Ramirez's personnel file on her secure laptop. "Sometimes your job becomes stopping people who build their careers on lies," Nadia said. "Tomorrow's one of those days." Layla perched on the desk's edge, careful not to disturb the neat stacks of documents. "What do you mean?" Nadia gestured to the files. "Ramirez thinks he lied about some random black woman who got uppity during a stop. He doesn't realize he perjured himself against a federal investigator on assignment." The laptop screen showed his record: 15 years on the force, multiple commendations, and, buried in the digital archives, 47 complaints quietly dismissed or downgraded. Nadia had spent months pulling data from federal systems, cross-checking reports, and meticulously assembling an airtight pattern of abuse and cover-ups. "Is he going to prison?" Layla asked, scanning the material with a keen, analytical gaze nurtured by her mother over the years. "Perjury's a felony," Nadia said, "but what matters more is how his lies tomorrow fit into a larger federal case. His own testimony becomes evidence." She opened another file containing surveillance videos, recovered body cam data, and statements from people who'd encountered Ramirez before. Her phone buzzed with a secure text from her DOJ supervisor. "Evidence package cleared for court presentation. Authorization code attached." Another puzzle piece locked into place. Nadia opened her secure briefcase and began loading it with the tools of federal accountability. Her DOJ credentials sat in a leather wallet next to subpoena forms and civil rights violation paperwork. Each document represented years of training and the full weight of the federal government. "Mom," Layla asked softly, "are you scared?" Nadia paused, fingers resting on the briefcase handle, eyes reflecting both fatigue and resolve. "Maybe a little nervous," she admitted, "but not scared. I've prosecuted powerful people in federal court before. I've watched what happens when authority gets abused over and over." She clicked open a video file, footage from a store near the stop. The timestamp captured the entire interaction, contradicting Ramirez's sworn story line by line. "This is just the start," she murmured, almost to herself as Layla leaned closer to watch. "The advantage of federal investigations," Nadia explained, "is that our resources go far beyond what local departments have. When Ramirez claimed his body cam malfunctioned, he didn't know federal protocols require redundant recording systems. When he convinced himself he could lie safely, he forgot civil rights violations fall under federal jurisdiction." Her desk phone rang, a direct line to DOJ headquarters, interrupting the quiet hum of equipment in her office. "Dr. Brooks, this is Director Hayes," came the voice on the other end. "You prepared for tomorrow's disclosure?" "The evidence is solid," Nadia replied. "We've documented Ramirez's false testimony. His pattern of civil rights violations is established, and his department's cover-up practices are fully mapped out. Once I show my credentials and introduce the exhibits, that courtroom will become ground zero for a federal civil rights case." Layla watched, wide-eyed, as her mother calmly discussed prosecution strategies with top-level officials. It was a side of Nadia she seldom saw up close, not just the caring parent at home, but the federal agent who devoted her life to confronting systemic injustice. When the call ended, Nadia shut her briefcase with a decisive click, the sound echoing in the quiet room like a signal that the next phase had begun. "Tomorrow," Nadia told her daughter, "you'll see what happens when someone lies under oath about a federal inspector. Ramirez thinks he ruined some random woman's reputation. Instead, he handed us exactly what we needed to expose his entire department's culture of corruption." "Will you be safe?" Layla asked, genuine worry in her voice. She knew all too well that challenging powerful institutions came with risks. Nadia gave a small, confident smile. I carry the full authority of the Department of Justice, sweetheart. This time, accountability picked him, not the other way around. Mother and daughter headed downstairs for dinner, leaving the office lights dimming behind them. On the floor, near the door, the briefcase waited, loaded not just with her defense, but with the blueprint for dismantling Ramirez's carefully guarded reputation. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the courthouse's tall windows as proceedings resumed. Word of the previous day's unexpected testimony had spread, drawing an even larger crowd. Judge Whitman brought the room to order, expressions suggesting he anticipated something unusual. Your Honor, Emily Carter announced with renewed confidence. The defense calls Mr. Daniel Choi to the stand. A slightly nervous Korean man in his 50s walked forward, adjusting his glasses. Ramirez tensed, not recognizing the name but sensing danger. Daniel raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, then settled into the witness chair. Mr. Choi, please state your occupation, Emily began. I own Choi Electronics on Oak Ridge Avenue, about 50 yards from where the alleged incident occurred on March 15th, he replied in careful but fluent English. The prosecutor jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. We weren't given notice of this witness. The defense only uncovered this evidence yesterday, Emily answered. Mr. Choi possesses security footage that directly conflicts with Officer Ramirez's sworn account. Judge Whitman leaned forward, clearly intrigued. I'll allow it. Proceed. From the defense table, Nadia observed every detail with professional focus. She'd spent years building cases on precisely this kind of unexpected evidence. Neutral video and audio that told the truth when human testimony had been corrupted. Mr. Choi, do you have security cameras on your property? Emily asked. Yes, he replied. 4 high-definition cameras with audio. They cover the front of my store and the street, including the area where the traffic stop occurred. The system records continuously and keeps footage for 90 days. Ramirez's stomach dropped. In 15 years of shading reports, he'd never seriously considered independent surveillance outside department control. Did you review the footage from March 15th? Emily continued. Yes. After I saw the case mentioned on local news, I checked my recordings. What I saw made me very uneasy. The prosecutor shot up. Objection, Your Honor. The witness can't comment on testimony he never heard. Sustained, the judge said. Mr. Choi, just describe what you personally observed in the recordings. Facts only. The tension in the room tightened. Emily held up a tablet. Your Honor, the defense moves to admit Exhibit A, security footage from Mr. Choi's system. The courtroom monitor flickered on, displaying a clear view of Oak Ridge Avenue that evening. The timestamp read 8:31 p.m. as Nadia's sedan pulled calmly to the curb, Ramirez's cruiser rolling in behind with lights flashing. Mr. Choi, please explain what we're seeing, Emily said. All eyes turned to the screen. The black woman, this defendant, immediately slows and stops, Daniel explained. She turns the engine off and puts both hands on the steering wheel. They remain visible the entire time. On the footage, Nadia sat perfectly still, her posture controlled. Ramirez's discomfort was obvious as his carefully crafted story began to unravel in front of the jury, frame by frame, dissolving the violent, chaotic picture he had painted earlier. What happens when Officer Ramirez reaches her window? Emily asked. At first, it looks routine, Daniel replied. He requests documents. She hands them over calmly. Then, he pointed at the monitor, his posture changes when he looks at her license. You can see his body language become more aggressive, his gestures more sharp. The jury watched closely, seeing the exact moment the officer's demeanor shifted from professional to confrontational. Does the defendant ever reach toward her glove compartment in a threatening way, as described by Officer Ramirez? Emily asked. Absolutely not, Daniel answered firmly. Her hands leave the wheel only to pass him paperwork, then go back. No sudden moves, no lunging. Objection, the prosecutor cried. He's characterizing her behavior. Overruled, Judge Whitman said, clearly riveted. He may continue describing what he observed on the footage. Emily pressed on. Your system also records audio, correct? Did you hear their conversation? Yes, and what I heard worried me, Daniel replied. Officer Ramirez made several comments about where she lives and how she could pay for that address. The prosecutor rose again. desperate to regain control as the narrative slipped from his hands. But the jury's attention was welded to the screen and the calm, factual voice contradicting a decorated officer. Daniel continued. The defendant stayed respectful and did not threaten him. She questioned why he was asking about her neighborhood instead of the alleged traffic issue. His tone grew hostile. Each word chipped away at Ramirez's credibility. The man who had strutted off the stand the day before now sat rigid, trying to look composed, while his supposedly heroic actions were dismantled in real time by unbiased digital evidence. The prosecutor tried another objection. Your Honor, this witness is clearly biased, having watched news coverage. Bias doesn't erase video, Judge Whitman replied dryly. We'll allow the footage to speak for itself. The courtroom crackled with energy. Emily, now fully in her element, guided Daniel through the playback, highlighting each moment that contradicted Ramirez's dramatic claims of lunges, threats, and out-of-control behavior from the defendant. Frame after frame. Audio clip after audio clip. The truth became impossible to ignore. Nadia never raised her voice, never made a move toward a weapon, never tried to flee. Instead, the recording showed an officer whose tone escalated without provocation, whose questions veered away from traffic safety and into class-tinged harassment. The jurors exchanged glances, their earlier confidence in Ramirez's version visibly dissolving under the cold clarity of video. Mr. Choi, Emily asked, at any point in this footage, do you see the defendant behaving violently or aggressively toward Officer Ramirez? No, he said. She appears calm and controlled the whole time. If anything, he seems to be the one provoking tension. His answer hit like a hammer. The gallery buzzed, and even the court reporter's fingers seemed to pause for a fraction of a second across the keys. The prosecutor, flustered, tried to suggest camera angles might be misleading or that the audio quality was unreliable. But the footage was clear enough that anyone watching could see who was telling the truth. Ramirez's earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by the stiff posture of a man beginning to understand the gravity of what he'd done in front of a federal investigator and a very attentive judge. Emily wrapped up carefully. Thank you, Mr. Choi. No further questions. As he stepped down, the jurors kept glancing between the defense table and Ramirez. The supposedly open and shut case now looked like something entirely different. A staged narrative collapsing under verifiable evidence. Nadia sat quietly, hands folded, letting the silence speak. She knew from experience that juries never forgot the moment a lie was caught on camera. The judge called for a brief recess, perhaps to steady the proceedings, and his own reaction. When court resumed, tension hung heavier than before. The prosecutor's earlier swagger was gone, replaced by a more cautious, defensive stance. Ramirez avoided Nadia's gaze altogether. For the first time, he seemed aware that his badge and polished record might not save him from the consequences of lying so brazenly in open court. Emily rose slowly, sensing momentum firmly on their side. Your Honor, she said, the defense will be calling additional witnesses and introducing further documentation tying this incident to a broader pattern. But before we do, we believe the jury should fully absorb what they've just seen. She turned slightly toward them, letting the weight of the footage, the undeniable visual truth, settle in their minds like a stone dropped in still water. Ramirez shifted again in his seat. Every movement awkward now. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced with the drawn face of someone realizing he might need an attorney of his own. Nadia remained composed, but inside she recognized the familiar turning point of a systemic case. The moment when the narrative finally broke free from departmental spin and surfaced into daylight, supported by hard evidence that no press release could explain away. The prosecutor cleared his throat, trying to reclaim some control. Your Honor, the state questions the completeness of this video. And you'll have a chance to cross-examine counsel, Judge Whitman cut in. For now, the jury has seen what it has seen. The words echoed like a warning. In the back of the courtroom, someone exhaled loudly, as if the entire room had been holding its breath. Emily stepped toward the monitor once more. Mr. Choi, just one last question for clarification, she said, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Your system records audio as well. Did you hear Officer Ramirez making any statements about the defendant's neighborhood or how she could afford her home? Daniel nodded, gaze steady. Yes, I heard him say things that were deeply inappropriate and had nothing to do with traffic enforcement. He grew more hostile even though she never provoked him, Daniel Choi explained. The courtroom speakers hissed softly as the audio played. Ramirez's voice came through, sharp and unmistakable. How does someone like you afford that neighborhood? People from your background need to learn respect for authority. Shocked gasps swept the gallery. Jurors shifted, visibly rattled by the clear racial contempt in his tone. Did the defendant make any threats toward Officer Ramirez as he swore under oath? Emily Carter asked. None at all, Choi replied. She stayed calm and respectful the entire time. She answered yes, sir, and no, sir, without raising her voice. Before everyone's eyes, Ramirez's story disintegrated. What he'd painted as a dangerous clash now appeared as targeted harassment of a composed, law-abiding professional. Mr. Choi, in the recording, does the defendant seem impaired by drugs or alcohol? Emily continued. Not in the slightest, he answered. She speaks clearly, responds immediately, follows every instruction. Her demeanor is fully cooperative. Emily paused, letting the contrast sink in. Based on what you observed, did Officer Ramirez's sworn version accurately reflect that encounter? The prosecutor objected, but Judge Whitman allowed the question to stand. Officer Ramirez lied, Choi said plainly. Everything he testified to was false. She never threatened him, never lunged for anything, never turned aggressive. She was being hassled, not the one causing trouble. On the monitor, the footage kept rolling, each frame highlighting the distance between Ramirez's dramatic story and the quiet reality. The violent criminal he described was revealed as a poised woman enduring targeted abuse. Your Honor, Emily announced, seizing the momentum, the defense calls Mrs. Eleanor Washington to the stand. An older black woman, late 70s, made her way forward with careful steps and clear dignity, though her hands trembled slightly. Ramirez's eyes widened as recognition hit him. Another encounter he'd hoped was buried under paperwork and departmental spin, now walking straight into the light of a public courtroom. Mrs. Washington, Emily began gently, have you previously had dealings with Officer Ramirez? Yes, ma'am, she replied, voice quavering but strong. Last September, he stopped me outside my church and treated me awful. She drew a breath, said the same kind of things about how I didn't belong in certain neighborhoods. The prosecutor tried to object on relevance, but Judge Whitman quickly overruled him. I'll allow testimony regarding a pattern of behavior, the judge said firmly. Did Officer Ramirez file an honest report about that encounter? Emily asked. Lord, no, Mrs. Washington replied, a steely edge in her tone. He wrote that I was loud, threatening, same mess he said about this doctor here, but the church cameras showed I never raised my voice or hands. Pure lies, every line. Witness after witness followed. Each one painted the same picture. Ramirez repeatedly targeting black residents, inventing aggression where there was none, and crafting official reports to justify his conduct. In the defendant's chair, Nadia typed steadily on her government tablet, recording each detail like a seasoned federal prosecutor building a civil rights indictment, not just fighting for her own freedom. Ramirez still had no idea that the person he'd chosen to lie about was cataloging his perjury for federal use. The state's case was evaporating right in front of them, but the real shockwave hadn't even landed yet. Judge Whitman called a brief recess, giving everyone a moment to absorb the explosive contradictions between the officer's testimony and the independent evidence now piled against him. When court resumed, the room buzzed with restless energy. Ramirez sat ramrod straight, sweat gathering along his hairline as his carefully crafted story collapsed piece by piece. Your Honor, the judge began, voice grave. Given the substantial conflicts between Officer Ramirez's sworn testimony and the neutral evidence presented, this court is deeply concerned that perjury may have occurred. He looked from the officer to counsel. Before going further, I want both sides to address these discrepancies. The prosecutor rose, clearly unsettled. Your Honor, Officer Ramirez stands by his testimony. It's possible the surveillance footage doesn't capture every angle or nuance. Emily stood next, posture suddenly confident. Your Honor, the defense has further proof that will conclusively show Ramirez lied under oath. She hesitated meaningfully. but introducing it requires a disclosure that will fundamentally alter the nature of these proceedings." Judge Whitman leaned forward, curiosity sharpening his tone. "What kind of disclosure, Ms. Carter?" Emily glanced toward Nadia. Nadia gave a calm nod, rose from her chair, and walked to her briefcase with a presence that seemed to deepen the silence in the courtroom. Every eye followed as she removed a worn leather credential wallet. "Your Honor," Nadia said, her voice now carrying a different kind of authority, "I must present federal evidence and reveal my true status for the record." She flipped the wallet open and held up her identification so the bench could see. "Dr. Nadia Brooks, Senior Inspector, Civil Rights Division, United States Department of Justice." The room exploded with noise. Gasps, whispered curses, stunned exclamations rolled through the gallery. The prosecutor stared, speechless. Jurors leaned back in disbelief, but no one reacted more dramatically than Officer Ramirez, whose face went nearly gray as the enormity of his situation crashed over him. He had just lied, repeatedly, about a federal law enforcement officer. "Federal inspector," Judge Whitman repeated slowly, clearly shaken. "Dr. Brooks, you're stating that you are a federal law enforcement official." "Yes, Your Honor," Nadia replied. "I possess federal enforcement authority and have been running an undercover civil rights investigation into this police department for the past 18 months. Ramirez felt the room tilt. Every false word he'd spoken now glowed like a red-hot brand on the record. "On the record," Nadia continued, all traces of defendant's timidity gone. What Officer Ramirez called a routine traffic stop was, in fact, part of federally documented evidence collection in an ongoing civil rights probe. Our interaction was recorded using federal surveillance protocols." She approached the bench and handed over a thick folder. "These are my credentials. Investigative authorization and documentation showing his entire testimony is perjury in a federal case." The prosecutor looked like someone had just kicked the floor out from under him. "Your Honor, we had no indication she was federal." "Because I was operating undercover," Nadia replied smoothly, "as permitted under federal civil rights authorities. Officer Ramirez's stop, his harassment, and now his false testimony are all evidence in a broader federal investigation into this department's civil rights violations." The judge studied the credentials, flipping carefully through pages. "Dr. Brooks, these appear to be legitimate federal identification documents," he said slowly. "Are you explicitly stating that Officer Ramirez has committed perjury against a federal inspector?" "That is exactly what I'm stating," she answered. "He knowingly gave false testimony under oath about his encounter with a federal law enforcement officer acting in an official capacity." Ramirez's defense attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but Ramirez barely registered the words over the rushing in his head. In a single day, he had obliterated his career, stacked up multiple felonies, and handed the Justice Department pristine evidence of his corruption. Additionally, Nadia went on, the federal probe has tracked a repeating pattern of similar violations by Ramirez over 3 years. His perjury today aligns with false reports in 47 prior incidents involving black residents. Conversations burst out across the gallery. Local reporters scribbled furiously, realizing they were watching a major federal scandal unfold live. "Your Honor," Nadia said, returning calmly to the defense table, "I request this court acknowledge federal jurisdiction and immediately notify the U.S. Attorney's Office regarding perjury charges against Officer Ramirez." For a long moment, Judge Whitman said nothing, absorbing the full scale of what had just been revealed. Finally, he spoke. "Dr. Brooks, this court recognizes your federal authority." His gaze shifted to Ramirez. "Officer Ramirez, you have just committed perjury against a federal law enforcement officer in my courtroom. This is now formally a federal matter." Ramirez sagged, as if some inner support had snapped. He had believed he was smearing a random black woman with no power to fight back. Instead, he had delivered the Department of Justice everything they needed to dismantle him. "Your Honor," Nadia said, standing once more, "as both the target of Ramirez's perjury and the lead federal investigator on this civil rights case, I request permission to cross-examine him under federal jurisdiction." "Given these extraordinary circumstances, Dr. Brooks," the judge replied gravely, "you may proceed." Ramirez watched in dawning horror as the woman he'd tried to crush walked toward him with the cool assurance of a seasoned federal prosecutor. His hands shook as she opened a thick case file stamped with federal seals and positioned it on the podium only a few feet from his chair. "Officer Ramirez," Nadia began, voice resonant with federal authority, "you remain under oath. Do you understand that lying to a federal officer is a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison?" Yes, Ramirez stammered, all bravado gone. "Good. You testified that I threatened you during the stop. That was false, wasn't it?" His attorney moved to object, but Nadia spoke over him. "Your Honor, this witness has already perjured himself about a federal officer," she said tightly. "This goes directly to the heart of the federal investigation." "Answer the question, Officer Ramirez," the judge ordered. "I might have misremembered some details," Ramirez muttered weakly. "Misremembered?" Nadia's voice sharpened. "You swore I lunged toward a suspected weapon, yet federal footage shows my hands never left the steering wheel." "That's not a fuzzy memory, that's perjury." She pulled a sheaf of documents from the file. "Officer Ramirez, are you familiar with the federal database tracking police misconduct complaints?" "Objection," the prosecutor called, desperation creeping in. "Relevance." "Your Honor," Nadia answered calmly, "the federal investigation has uncovered a pattern of perjury tied to civil rights violations. It goes directly to this witness's credibility." "Overruled," Judge Whitman said. "Proceed." Nadia faced Ramirez again, who was now openly sweating. "According to federal records, you have submitted false reports in 47 cases over the last 3 years. All involve black residents. All contain invented details. All are reinforced by your sworn testimony. Isn't that correct?" The room fell silent, save for the faint scratch of the court reporter's keys. "Let me read from your report, dated September 12th, 2024. Nadia continued, lifting another paper. "You claimed Mrs. Eleanor Washington became hostile and threatened you. Yet church security footage shows she remained calm and respectful throughout. That was another lie under oath, wasn't it?" "I don't remember that specific incident," Ramirez whispered. "Then let's try March 3rd, 2024, she said coolly. "You swore that Mr. Jordan Robinson resisted arrest and tried to run. Federal review of the body cam video shows total compliance. Another fabrication, correct?" In the gallery, Ramirez's partner, Officer Blake Jensen, silently rose and slipped out of the courtroom, visibly distancing himself from the unfolding federal catastrophe. "Officer Ramirez," Nadia pressed, "federal analysis shows a clear pattern. Whenever you encounter a black citizen in a higher income area, you manufacture criminal conduct. Then you lie in court to back up your reports. Isn't that what you've been doing?" I just do my job," Ramirez choked. "Your job?" Nadia's tone cut like glass. "Your job has become inventing crimes. Your job has become perjuring yourself against innocent people. Your job has become violating civil rights based on race." Angry murmurs burst from the gallery. Several residents who had experienced similar treatment called out in frustration before court security hushed them. "Federal investigators have confirmed at least 17 separate instances where you lied under oath about black citizens," Nadia continued, her voice swelling with righteous control. "Each lie cost someone their freedom, reputation, or livelihood. Each lie is a federal crime." Ramirez finally cracked. He stammered. "People need to respect authority. Some of them act like they're better than us because of where they live. So you decided to teach them lessons by forging charges and committing perjury," Nadia demanded. "I never meant it to go this far," Ramirez whispered, his shoulders slumping, the admission hanging in the air like a confession. "Officer Ramirez," Nadia said, her voice steady but unyielding, "you have now admitted to systematic perjury and repeated civil rights violations." She turned slightly toward the bench. "As a federal law enforcement officer, I'm formally placing you under federal investigation for conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law." She faced the judge fully. "Your Honor, I recommend immediate notification of federal authorities and his suspension pending criminal charges." Ramirez sagged back into his chair, thoroughly shattered. His badge might as well have evaporated. His career was done. His future now pointed toward a prison cell. The lies that once shielded him had transformed into evidence aimed squarely at his own head. Judge Whitman called for another recess to confer with federal officials and the local district attorney's office about next steps. When court returned to session, the room vibrated with anticipation. Rumors had spread that a major federal civil rights case was unfolding in real time. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the judge began solemnly, "You have heard extraordinary testimony today." He paused, eyes scanning their faces. "Before we move to closing arguments, I must address the federal implications of what has occurred." He turned to Ramirez, who sat slumped like a man awaiting sentence. "Officer Ramirez, you have admitted under oath to a pattern of perjury and civil rights violations. I am formally notifying the United States Attorney's Office of your statements today. You are immediately suspended from all law enforcement duties pending federal review." A court officer stepped forward to collect his badge and gun. Ramirez stared blankly ahead as the symbols of his authority were taken away, his mind reeling at the speed of his downfall. "Dr. Brooks," the judge continued, as both the investigating federal officer and the target of Ramirez's false testimony, "would you like to address the court before we proceed?" Nadia rose slowly, that familiar mix of calm and steel returning to her posture. She approached the jury box with the assurance of someone who'd stood in front of juries countless times, but usually at the prosecution table. "Members of the jury," she began, her voice filling the room, "today you witnessed something rare. Systemic corruption didn't get swept aside or negotiated away. It was dragged into the light by federal oversight and your willingness to see the truth." She motioned toward Ramirez without fully turning. Officer Ramirez didn't merely exaggerate. He committed perjury against a federal law enforcement officer carrying out an official civil rights investigation. And as you've learned, that lie was not an isolated moment. It was part of a pattern stretching back years and across dozens of victims. The jurors watched, rapt, as she laid out the larger picture. "For 3 years," Nadia continued, "Ramirez weaponized his badge and the witness stand. He fabricated criminal behavior, wrote false reports, and then lied under oath in courtrooms just like this, targeting black citizens for no reason other than prejudice and power." She moved to the evidence table, lifting thick binders. 47 documented false reports, 17 confirmed instances of perjury, one long trail of shattered lives. Several jurors shook their heads in disgust, the weight of it all sinking in. "Ramirez assumed he could do the same thing to me," Nadia said, voice firm. "He saw a black woman he assumed no one would believe over a decorated officer. What he didn't see was the federal badge in my briefcase, or the recording devices, or the resources behind me." Turning toward the crowded benches, she gestured to residents scattered throughout. "And I was never his only victim. Mrs. Washington is here. Mr. Robinson is here. Many of the 17 other citizens whose names appear in these files are here. They came to watch the system that failed them finally hold someone accountable." Tears glinted on more than one face in the gallery. The prosecutor sat motionless, understanding there was nothing left to salvage. No closing argument could undo recorded video, sworn admissions, or federal documents. "Members of the jury," Nadia said, "perjury isn't just a lie. It's a weapon aimed at justice itself. When an officer lies under oath, he doesn't only attack one person, he undermines every citizen's faith that courts can uncover the truth." She let the silence stretch for a beat. "Today, you've seen what happens when federal oversight confronts local corruption. Ramirez's lies have been exposed. His pattern of abuse has been documented, and his conduct now falls squarely within federal criminal law." Judge Whitman watched her with open respect, seeing not a defendant, but a seasoned federal prosecutor at work. "The record is overwhelming," Nadia concluded. "Ramirez lied about me, about Mrs. Washington, about Mr. Robinson, and about countless others. Federal law makes it clear. Systematic perjury and racially targeted civil rights violations are serious felonies. No badge, no ribbon, no years of service can shield that." For the first time, she turned fully to face Ramirez. "Officer Ramirez," she said quietly but audibly, "your badge never gave you permission to lie. Your uniform never authorized you to invent crimes, and your service record does not erase 3 years of federal offenses." She faced the jury again. "Justice today isn't just about me. It's about ensuring no one else endures what we endured under his so-called authority." The jury left to deliberate. They were gone less than half an hour. When they returned, the four-person stood, verdict slip in hand. On all charges against Dr. Nadia Brooks, he read, we find the defendant not guilty. Relief washed over the defense table, but Nadia only closed her eyes briefly. She knew the real verdict still waited just outside the courtroom doors. Moments later, the doors opened and several U.S. Marshals entered, crisp and unmistakable in their uniforms. Officer Luis Ramirez, the lead marshal announced, voice ringing through the room. You are under arrest on federal charges, conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, systematic perjury, and obstruction of justice. He held up a warrant stamped with the authority of the United States. Ramirez barely moved as restraints were placed on his wrists. The gallery erupted in applause and shouts of vindication. Community members who had suffered under his false reports stood, some crying, some clapping, until their hands were red. Judge Whitman hammered his gavel for order. This court finds that Ramirez engaged in systematic perjury and civil rights violations. The federal investigation will continue, and more charges may follow. Nadia quietly packed her federal files, a small, satisfied smile touching her lips. The man who had tried to use his badge to break her now faced years behind bars, his lies turned against him. Outside, cameras captured Ramirez being placed into a federal transport vehicle. His career ended on the courthouse steps where he'd once strutted, his name now synonymous with corruption. 6 months later, the transformation was visible. The same courthouse that had once rubber-stamped his testimony now displayed a framed federal consent decree in the lobby, outlining sweeping reforms for the entire department. What began as just one traffic stop had exposed a rot that reached into supervisors' offices, internal affairs desks, and the chief's suite. The entire system had been forced to change. Ramirez now occupied a bunk in federal prison, serving a 5-year sentence for conspiracy, serial perjury, and obstruction. His pension was gone, his certification revoked, his name a cautionary tale at law enforcement trainings nationwide. The once decorated officer who built his reputation on lies had become the poster child for what happens when federal accountability finally bites back. He hadn't gone down alone. Nadia's investigation led to charges against 8 additional officers, 3 ranking supervisors, and the former police chief who'd buried complaints. The Civil Rights Division had turned a single lie into a blueprint for dismantling an entire culture of abuse. Policy manuals were rewritten. Oversight boards were empowered. Quiet cover-ups were replaced with mandatory reporting and federal review. Months later, Dr. Nadia Brooks stood at a podium at the National Civil Rights Summit, addressing a packed auditorium of federal prosecutors, civil rights lawyers, scholars, and grassroots organizers. Her case had become a teaching model, a real-world demonstration of how federal enforcement could challenge entrenched local misconduct and protect constitutional rights that had once seemed purely theoretical to many residents. When Ramirez lied about me, she told the audience, he believed he was just tearing down one woman's credibility. Instead, he handed federal investigators exactly what we needed to expose years of civil rights abuses and hold an entire department accountable. Applause erupted, echoing off the hotel ballroom's high ceiling. Nadia stood steady, accepting it not for herself, but for every name in her case files. Truth doesn't fear investigation, she continued when the room quieted. Lies do. And when public officials weaponize false testimony against citizens, federal law exists to make sure those lies carry consequences. In the front row, Layla watched her mother with fierce pride. She'd seen the fear and anger of those early days. Now she watched that pain turned into systemic change and national recognition. After Nadia received the DOJ's highest commendation for integrity and service, the crowd rose in a standing ovation. The woman, once humiliated in a small-town courtroom, now stood as a national symbol of federal accountability. Meanwhile, the police department she'd investigated operated under strict oversight, tamper-proof body cams, independent auditing of reports, and automatic federal review of any complaint involving falsified evidence. Every arrest now required corroboration beyond a single officer's word. New training modules focused on civil rights compliance and the dangers of implicit bias. Any hint of false reporting triggered mandatory notification to the Civil Rights Division. The era of unchecked he said, she said was over in that jurisdiction. Officers quickly learned that lying carried career-ending, freedom-stealing consequences. Mrs. Washington, whose own nightmare encounter with Ramirez had finally been vindicated, approached Nadia after the conference. "Thank you for proving federal justice still means something," she said, tears shining in her eyes. "You saved our community from many more years of his abuse." Nadia hugged her gently. "You saved it too, Mrs. Washington. You spoke up when others were scared. I just brought the badge." Many of the 17 documented victims attended as well. People whose names Ramirez had turned into case numbers now stood tall, their criminal records expunged, their reputations restored. Federal settlements offered some compensation, but the real victory was the recognition that they had been victims, not criminals. Their stories, once dismissed, now anchored federal court opinions and training materials nationwide. Back in her office, Nadia returned to work with sharpened purpose. She knew there were other departments, other Ramirezes hiding behind uniforms and polished reports. But she also knew that one carefully documented case could change everything. One recording, one brave witness, one judge willing to listen, combined with federal authority, could topple a whole chain of lies. The lesson was simple but powerful. When those in power lie under oath, federal oversight is not optional, it's essential. When local systems collapse under the weight of their own corruption, federal law provides a lifeline for the truth. And when civil rights are trampled in the name of order, there are still people willing to push back. Badge or no badge, somewhere a narrator's voice carried her story beyond the courtroom and conference halls. Share this story, he urged viewers. Share how truth cornered a corrupt officer and forced an entire department to change. Subscribe to stay updated on federal accountability cases. Hit the notification bell because justice needs witnesses. Screens across the country lit up with Nadia's case, transforming local pain into national awareness. Tap like if you believe in the power of federal oversight to defend our constitutional rights. The voice continued. Remember, heroes aren't always wearing capes. Sometimes they're wearing suits, or carrying federal badges, or just walking into court with the courage to tell the truth when everyone expects them to be silent. Nadia's image appeared on screen, standing in that courtroom, credentials in hand. "The story you just heard isn't sanitized," the narrator said. "It's not sugar-coated or edited to make anyone comfortable. It's told the way it really unfolded. At Black Stories, we believe that's the only way truth survives." Clips replayed. Ramirez in handcuffs, Mrs. Washington embracing Nadia, Layla cheering from the front row. Pain, resistance, and accountability woven into one narrative. If this moved you, the voice urged, hit like, drop your reactions in the comments, and subscribe. Every week, we bring you stories from people who refuse to be silenced, who stand up to power with nothing but their voices, their evidence, and their courage. The outro music rose, underscoring photos of community meetings, protest signs, and federal court buildings. On one screen, a young law student watched and decided to specialize in civil rights litigation. On another, a small-town resident realized they weren't crazy for doubting a decorated officer's word. Across countless devices, people learned that perjury by police isn't just a rumor, it's a fightable crime. The channel's message was clear. Corruption can be confronted, and the law can still be a weapon for justice. Truth has enemies, the narrator finished, but it also has defenders. People like Dr. Nadia Brooks, senior inspector who turned one traffic stop into a federal reckoning. People like you, who watch, share, and refuse to look away. The video faded to black, leaving one final line on screen. Justice doesn't happen in silence. It needs witnesses. It needs you. The outro cut and the platform's interface returned. Below the video, comments poured in. Stories, outrage, gratitude, determination. Black Stories signed off with its familiar tag. New stories every week, real voices, no filters. And somewhere, in a quiet office stacked with case files, Nadia opened another folder, ready to confront the next set of lies with the same relentless federal truth. Truth outlives the lie. If you're in your late 60s or beyond, you've seen slick talkers come and go. Ramirez walked into court. Sure, his badge and rehearsed story would crush a black woman's dignity, but Nadia carried something stronger: quiet notes, a federal badge, and the patience to let the facts speak. Accountability never ages. Many of you remember when civil rights laws were first signed. This case shows those promises still breathe. After years of abuse, one prepared witness, one firm judge, and neighbors paying attention can finally pull a crooked officer off his pedestal. Friends, after hearing how Nadia turned one routine traffic stop into a full federal reckoning, I'd love to hear from you. In your lifetime, have you ever seen someone in power get caught in a lie and finally face real consequences? How did it affect your trust in the system? Please share your stories or reflections in the comments so others can learn from your experience. And if this kind of honest, unfiltered storytelling matters to you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and turn on notifications for future episodes.